The letter arrived on the hottest day of August, 1882. But Helena Reeves felt cold dread seep through her bones as she read the telegram that followed 3 weeks later, informing her that her mail-order groom would arrive in Central City, Colorado, by Friday's stagecoach. She had spent her last savings on the arrangement. Desperate to save her failing ranch after her father's death left her alone with debts she could never pay and neighbors who whispered that a woman had no business running cattle. At 23 years old, Helena had weathered harsh winters and scorching summers, but nothing prepared her for the look of pure revulsion on Edward Finch's face when he stepped down from that dusty stagecoach and laid eyes on her for the first time. She had dressed in her cleanest clothes, a simple blue calico dress that had belonged to her mother, her dark hair pinned back neatly despite the wind that whipped through the mountain town. Helena knew she was not a conventional beauty. The scar that ran from her left temple down to her jawline, a memento from a barn fire when she was 16, had seen to that. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, her skin tanned from endless days under the Colorado sun, and she stood nearly 5 feet 9 inches tall, which made most men uncomfortable. But she had been honest in her letters, describing herself plainly, never promising anything she could not deliver. Edward Finch was a slight man with thinning hair and narrow shoulders, dressed in an ill-fitting suit that had seen better days. He carried a small carpet bag and wore an expression of profound disappointment as his eyes swept over her from head to toe. Other people on the street had stopped to watch the meeting, curious about the stranger who had come to marry the Reeves woman. Helena felt their stares like pinpricks on her skin. "You are Helena Reeves?" Edward asked, his voice tight and nasal. "I am," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times, imagining a cordial greeting, perhaps even a shy smile. Instead, Edward's lips curled downward. "You did not mention the scar in your letters," he said loudly enough that several bystanders heard. "Or that you were built like a workhorse." Heat flooded Helena's cheeks, but before she could respond, Edward continued, his voice rising with each word. "I have traveled nearly 800 miles to this God-forsaken mountain town, and this is what awaits me. A scarred, disgusting creature who looks more fit for field work than a marriage bed." The words hit her like physical blows. Helena stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She wanted to disappear into the dusty street, to melt away into nothing. "I will not marry you," Edward declared. "I would rather return to Boston penniless than bind myself to such a repulsive woman." Something inside Helena shattered. She had known loneliness, had faced hardship and loss, but this public humiliation felt like a different kind of death. She turned to flee, tears blurring her vision when a deep voice cut through the awful silence. "That is enough." The voice belonged to a tall man who had been standing outside the general store. He moved toward them with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. Helena had seen him around town before, though they had never spoken. Everyone knew Austin Tate, the cowboy who worked the largest cattle operation in the territory, a man with a reputation for being fair, hardworking, and dangerous when provoked. Austin was well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of presence that made people step aside without thinking. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt, and his face bore the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught Helena's attention now, dark brown and blazing with an anger that seemed barely contained. "You need to leave," Austin said to Edward, his voice quiet but carrying a threat that made the smaller man take an involuntary step backward. "This is none of your concern," Edward sputtered, attempting to gather his dignity. "This is between me and this woman." "She has a name," Austin said, moving closer until he towered over Edward. "And you have said more than enough. The next stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it." Edward's face turned an unpleasant shade of red. "You cannot tell me what to do. I have every right to refuse this arrangement. Look at her. She is hideous." Austin's hand shot out and grabbed Edward by the collar of his jacket, lifting him slightly off the ground. The crowd gasped, and Helena found herself stepping forward, her hand outstretched. "Please," she whispered, though she was not sure if she was pleading for Edward's safety or something else entirely. Austin's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment their gazes locked. Then, very deliberately, he set Edward back on his feet and released him, though he did not step back. "He is wrong," Austin said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. He was not looking at Edward anymore. He was looking directly at Helena, his expression open and honest in a way that made her chest tighten. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Time seemed to stop. Helena stared at him, certain she had misheard, that this was some cruel joke meant to compound her humiliation. But Austin's face showed no trace of mockery. He looked at her as if she were something precious, something worth defending. Edward made a disgusted sound and grabbed his carpetbag. "You are welcome to her then," he spat, shouldering past Austin. "You deserve each other, two freaks together." Austin moved as if to follow, but Helena found her voice at last. "Let him go." He stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and watched as Edward stormed toward the hotel. The crowd began to disperse, conversations starting up in hushed tones that would fuel gossip for weeks to come. Helena stood in the middle of the street, trembling, unsure what to do or say. "Are you all right?" Austin asked, turning back to her. The kindness in his voice undid her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs that threatened to escape. She had been so certain that marrying Edward was her only hope, her only chance to save everything her father had built. Now that hope was gone, shattered by cruel words and her own reflection. "I should not have interfered," Austin said quietly. "I am sorry if I made things worse." Helena shook her head, unable to speak. She turned and walked quickly toward her horse, a sturdy bay mare tied to the hitching post near the Mercantile. Her hands shook as she untied the reins, and she fumbled the leather, dropping it twice before finally getting a grip. "Miss Reeves," Austin said from behind her. "Helena." Hearing her name in his voice stopped her. She stood with her back to him, one hand on her horse's neck, fighting for composure. "I meant what I said," Austin continued. "Every word." "You do not have to be kind," Helena managed, her voice rough with unshed tears. "I know what I am. Do you?" He moved closer, and she heard his boots on the packed earth. "Because I do not think you do." She turned then, anger flaring through the shame. "I have a mirror, Mr. Tate. I have eyes. I know what people see when they look at me." "They see a strong woman who has kept a ranch running on her own for 2 years," Austin said. "They see someone who works harder than most men I know. They see courage." "They see a scar," Helena said bitterly. "They see someone who could not even keep a desperate mail-order groom." Austin stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Then they are fools," he said simply. "That scar is part of your story, part of everything you have survived. It does not make you less beautiful. Nothing could." Helena wanted to believe him. God help her. She wanted to believe him more than she had wanted anything in a long time. But years of pitying looks and whispered comments had taught her better. "Why did you help me?" she asked instead. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Because I have watched you for months, he finally said. Every time you come to town, I see you. I see how hard you work, how you hold your head high even when people talk. I see your kindness when you help Mrs. Chen carry her groceries, or when you slip coins to the Peterson children when you think no one is looking. I see you, Helena. Really see you. And what I see is remarkable. Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her like this ever. She searched his face for any sign of deception and found only sincerity. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Say you will let me buy you coffee, Austin replied. Say you will give me a chance to prove I mean what I said. Helena knew she should refuse. She was already the subject of gossip, and being seen with Austin Tate would only add fuel to the fire. But something in his eyes, some genuine warmth, made her nod before she could think better of it. They walked to the small restaurant near the hotel, and Austin held the door open for her. Inside, the lunch crowd had thinned, and they found a table near the window. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the establishment, brought coffee without being asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Helena wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to gather her scattered thoughts. Tell me about your ranch, Austin said, settling into his chair. He moved with an easy grace despite his size, and Helena found herself studying him more carefully. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. Small scars marked his hands, the kind that came from years of working with cattle and horses. There is not much to tell, Helena said. My father built it from nothing, spent 30 years making it profitable. When he died, he left it to me, along with his debts. I have been trying to keep it running, but it is hard work for one person. That is why you sent for a husband, Austin said, not making it a question. She nodded, shame heating her face again. I thought if I married, I could get a loan from the bank. They would not lend to me a loan, said a woman could not be trusted to manage such things. I needed the money to buy cattle for the winter, to repair the fences and the barn. I thought Edward was my answer. He would have been a poor answer, Austin said bluntly. A man like that would have taken your ranch and left you with nothing. You are better off without him. Maybe, Helena said. But now I have no options left. The bank will foreclose before winter. I will lose everything. Austin was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. What if you did not have to lose it? He asked. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? What if you had a husband who would help you, really help you, not just use you for what you own? Helena's heart began to pound. Mr. Tate, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, you should know I will not accept charity. I will not be anyone's burden. Austin, he corrected, and I am not offering charity, I am offering a partnership. We barely know each other, Helena protested, though part of her wanted to lean into the possibility he was presenting. We can change that, Austin said. I have been working for the Triple Crown Ranch for 5 years, saving my wages. I have enough to buy my own place, but I have been waiting for the right opportunity. Your ranch borders Triple Crown land. It would be a good investment. Helena felt her hopes plummet. Of course, this was about land, about business, not about her at all. She started to stand, but Austin reached across the table and caught her hand. Wait, he said. I am making a mess of this. That is not what I meant, or not just what I meant. She paused, looking down at his hand covering hers. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle despite his strength. I am no good with words, Austin admitted. But what I am trying to say is that I have noticed you for a long time, Helena, long before today. When I heard you were bringing in a husband, I told myself I had waited too long, that I should have spoken up sooner. Then today, when I saw how that bastard treated you, I could not stay quiet anymore. You do not know me, Helena repeated, but her voice was softer now, uncertain. Then let me learn, Austin said. Give me a chance. Let me court you properly, help you save your ranch, and if after a time you decide you want nothing to do with me, I will step back. But I think we could be good together, Helena. I really do. She studied him, trying to understand what he truly wanted. His eyes met hers steadily, no trace of pity or deception in them, only hope and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know? She asked. Austin smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. Because I believe in taking chances on things that matter. And you matter, Helena. You have mattered to me for longer than you know. The walls around her heart, built through years of disappointment and pain, began to crack. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I do not know if I can do this, she whispered. I do not know if I can trust this. I will earn your trust, Austin promised. Every day I will earn it. Just give me the chance. Helena took a shaky breath and nodded. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Austin's face lit up as if she had given him the greatest gift in the world. They talked for hours that afternoon, the coffee growing cold as they shared stories about their lives. Helena learned that Austin had come to Colorado from Texas after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 18. He had worked his way up from a simple ranch hand to the foreman's right-hand man, earning respect through skill and dedication. He told her about his love for the mountains, how different they were from the flat plains of Texas, and how he had always dreamed of having his own place to run as he saw fit. In turn, Helena told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the barn fire that had left her scarred, and the months of painful recovery that followed. She told him about her father's slow decline after her mother's death, how he had thrown himself into work to mask his grief, and how she had learned everything she knew about ranching by following him around from dawn until dusk. He never treated me different because I was a girl, Helena said softly. He taught me everything, said the ranch would be mine someday and I needed to know how to run it proper. He sounds like a good man, Austin said. He was, Helena agreed. I miss him every day. The sun was setting when they finally left the restaurant, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Austin walked Helena to her horse, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back in a way that felt both protective and respectful. Can I see you tomorrow? He asked as she gathered her reins. Helena hesitated. Everything was moving so fast, too fast perhaps, but the alternative was returning to her empty ranch to face the reality of her failed plans and uncertain future. At least with Austin, there was hope. I have to mend the fence on the north pasture, she said. The cattle keep getting through. I will help, Austin offered immediately. I can be there at dawn. She looked at him, this man who had appeared like some kind of miracle just when she needed it most, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Dawn then, she agreed. Austin helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist, and watched as she rode out of town. Helena glanced back once and saw him still standing there, his eyes following her. She turned back to the road ahead, her heart beating faster than it had in years. True to his word, Austin appeared at her ranch just as the sun was breaking over the mountains. Helena had been up for an hour already, feeding the chickens and mucking out the stalls, and she looked up in surprise as he rode into her yard on a magnificent black stallion. You came, she said, unable to hide her surprise. I said I would, Austin replied, dismounting with easy grace. He looked around the property with an appraising eye, taking in the worn barn, the house that needed fresh paint, the corrals that leaned slightly to one side. But there was no judgment in his expression, only assessment. You have done well keeping this place running alone. It has not been easy, Helena admitted. She felt self-conscious suddenly, seeing her home through his eyes, aware of all its flaws and shortcomings. Austin seemed to sense her discomfort. I grew up in a soddy in Texas, he said. Dirt floor, grass roof that leaked every time it rained. This is a palace compared to that. They worked side by side all morning, replacing fence posts and restringing wire. Austin was efficient and skilled, and Helena found herself relaxing in his presence. He did not try to take over or tell her she was doing things wrong. Instead, he asked her opinion, followed her lead, and treated her like a true partner. By midday, they had completed the fence repair and moved on to checking the small herd of cattle Helena had managed to keep. She owned 43 head, a pitiful number compared to what her father had once run, but she cared for each animal as if it were precious gold. They are good stock, Austin observed, leaning against the fence rail. With the right bull and a few years, you could build this back up. If I can keep the ranch that long, Helena said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Austin turned to look at her. How much time do you have? The bank wants payment by October 1st, Helena said. That is 6 weeks from now. I owe $300 and I have maybe 50 saved. It was a fortune, an impossible sum. Austin was quiet for a long moment and Helena felt embarrassment wash over her. She should not have told him. It made her seem even more desperate than she was. Marry me, Austin said suddenly. Helena's head snapped up. What? Marry me, he repeated, pushing off from the fence to face her directly. Not next year or next month. This week. We can go to the courthouse tomorrow, make it legal. I have the money to pay off your debt and we can work the ranch together. Austin, you cannot be serious, Helena protested. We have known each other for 1 day. I have known you longer than that, he countered. I have watched you, admired you. I know what kind of person you are, and I think you know me better than you realize. You know I am a hard worker, that I am honest, that I will not treat you the way that bastard did yesterday. Helena's mind reeled. It was too much, too fast. Yet what choice did she really have? She could refuse and lose everything, or she could take a chance on this man who seemed too good to be true. Why? She asked again. Why would you do this? Austin stepped closer, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Because I want to. Because I believe we could have something real given time. Because I am tired of working someone else's land and sleeping in a bunkhouse. But mostly because when I look at you, I see my future. I see a partner, a companion, someone I could build a life with. You barely know me, Helena whispered, but her resolve was weakening. Then we will learn each other as we go, Austin said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and gently touch the scar on her face. His fingers were warm and calloused, and Helena felt tears sting her eyes at the tenderness of the gesture. This does not frighten me or repel me. It is part of you, part of your story. Let me be part of that story too, Helena. Let me stand beside you. She thought about Edward's cruel words, about the pity in people's eyes, about all the years she had believed herself unworthy of love or affection. Then she thought about Austin's steady presence, his kindness, the way he had defended her without hesitation. If I say yes, Helena said slowly, this has to be a real marriage, not just a business arrangement. I will not be married to someone who keeps me at arm's length. I would not want that either, Austin assured her. I want a true partnership, Helena, in every way. She took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. Then yes, she said, I will marry you. Austin's face broke into a wide smile, and before Helena could process what was happening, he swept her into his arms and spun her around. She let out a surprised laugh, her hands clutching his shoulders for balance. When he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. We should go to town tomorrow, Austin said. "Make the arrangements." Helena nodded, suddenly nervous again. "What will people say?" "They will say you got yourself a good husband," Austin replied firmly. "And if they say anything else, they will have to answer to me." That night, Helena lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she had made the right choice. Everything had happened so fast. Just 2 days ago, she had been preparing to marry a stranger from Boston. Now she was engaged to a cowboy she barely knew, planning a wedding that would take place within days. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Austin's face as he had looked at her in the street, heard his words echoing in her mind. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way he did, as if she were something precious and valuable. Maybe it was foolish to hope. Maybe she was setting herself up for more heartbreak. But for the first time in years, Helena felt something stirring in her chest that might have been happiness. They rode to Central City together the next morning, arriving at the courthouse just after it opened. The clerk, a balding man named Mr. Weatherby, looked surprised to see them together but asked no questions as he processed the paperwork. They would need to wait 3 days for the license, he explained, which meant the wedding could take place on Friday. 3 days, Austin said as they left the courthouse. "That gives us time to prepare." "There is not much to prepare," Helena said. "I have no family to invite, and I assume you do not either." "No family," Austin confirmed, "but I would like to do this right. You deserve a proper wedding, Helena, not just a quick ceremony in a courtroom." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You do not have to do that." "I want to," Austin insisted. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers in a way that felt natural and right. "Let me give you this. Let me make this day special." Over the next 3 days, Austin proved himself to be a man of his word. He arranged for Pastor Williams to perform the ceremony at the small church at the edge of town. He bought Helena a new dress, a beautiful pale green silk that must have cost him a month's wages, and commissioned Mrs. Chen to make a small bouquet of wildflowers. He invited his friends from the Triple Crown Ranch and made sure that Helena's few friends in town knew they were welcome. Helena watched these preparations with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Austin moved through each task with quiet determination, never complaining, never suggesting that any of it was too much trouble. When she tried to protest the expense, he simply shook his head. "This is important," he said. "This is the start of our life together. It matters." The night before the wedding, Helena stood in her small bedroom, looking at the green dress hanging on the wardrobe door. Tomorrow she would become Austin Tate's wife, would bind her life to his in ways that could not be undone. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a cautious optimism. Austin had spent every day at the ranch, working alongside her from dawn until dusk. He had fixed the barn door that had been hanging crooked for months, repaired the roof of the chicken coop, and helped her move the cattle to better grazing land. But more than the physical labor, he had talked to her, really talked to her, sharing his thoughts and dreams and listening to hers in return. She learned that he loved to read, that he carried a battered copy of Longfellow's poems in his saddlebag and could recite whole passages from memory. She learned that he had a gift with horses, that even the most skittish animal would calm under his hands. She learned that he was patient and kind, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in spite of herself. And slowly, carefully, Helena began to trust that this might be real, that Austin truly wanted this marriage for more than just practical reasons. Friday dawned clear and beautiful, the Colorado sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Helena dressed carefully in the green silk, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned up her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the scar that had defined so much of her life, and for the first time in years, she did not look away in shame. Austin had touched that scar with reverence, had called her beautiful without reservation. Maybe it was time to start believing him. Mrs. Chen arrived early to help with the final preparations, her weathered face creased in a rare smile. "You make a beautiful bride," she said in her accented English, adjusting the flowers in Helena's hair. "That man, he looks at you like you are the sun. You are lucky." "I know," Helena whispered, and realized she meant it. The church was small but nearly full when Helena arrived. Austin had invited more people than she expected, and she recognized familiar faces from town, people who had known her father, neighbors who had watched her struggle to keep the ranch running. They smiled at her with genuine warmth, and Helena felt some of her nervousness ease. Then she saw Austin standing at the front of the church, and everything else faded away. He wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and his hair was neatly combed. But it was his expression that stole her breath, the way his eyes lit up when he saw her, the smile that spread across his face as if she were the most magnificent thing he had ever witnessed. Pastor Williams conducted a simple ceremony, his voice warm and steady as he spoke about love and commitment, about the bonds of marriage that would unite two lives into one. Helena barely heard the words. She was too focused on Austin, on the way his hand held hers firmly but gently, on the emotion she saw flickering in his eyes. When it came time for the vows, Austin's voice was clear and strong. "I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to honor you all the days of my life. I promise to see you, really see you, and to never let you doubt your worth." Helena's voice shook as she repeated her own vows, promising to be a true partner, to share in both joy and hardship, to build a life together based on trust and respect. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams said with a satisfied smile. "Austin, you may kiss your bride." Austin stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently cup Helena's face. He looked at her for a long moment, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and then he kissed her softly. It was Helena's first kiss, and it was sweet and tender, filled with promise. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. When Austin pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Hello, wife," he said quietly just for her. "Hello, husband," Helena replied, and felt a smile break across her face, wide and genuine and full of hope. The reception was held at Mrs. Patterson's restaurant, which had been decorated with more wildflowers and cheerful bunting. There was food and music, and people came up to congratulate them, shaking Austin's hand and kissing Helena's cheek. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and Helena found herself laughing more than she had in years. As the sun began to set, Austin led her outside to where his black stallion and her bay mare stood waiting. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Home. They're home now together." Helena nodded, and Austin helped her onto her horse, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. They rode out of town side by side, husband and wife, toward the ranch that would be their future. That night, in the privacy of Helena's bedroom, which was now their bedroom, Austin was patient and gentle. He took his time, treating her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. When he traced the line of her scar with his lips, whispering that she was beautiful, Helena finally believed him. She let down the walls she had built around her heart and allowed herself to feel, to trust, to hope. Afterward, lying in Austin's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Helena felt a peace she had never known. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Austin asked, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "For seeing me," Helena said. "For making me feel like I matter." Austin shifted so he could look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight filtering through the window. "You do matter. You are everything, Helena. I meant every word I said to you that day on the street. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Helena kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and growing affection into the gesture. She was falling in love with her husband, this good man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers. She had been too afraid to pray. The next morning, they began their life together in earnest. Austin used his savings to pay off Helena's debt at the bank, and they met with Mr. Morrison, the bank manager, to close the account. The older man looked surprised but pleased as he stamped the paperwork. "I am glad to see you have found a solution, Mrs. Tate," he said, and Helena felt a thrill at hearing her new name. "Your father would be proud of how you fought to keep his legacy alive." With the debt cleared, Austin and Helena could focus on building the ranch back up. Austin proved to be as skilled and knowledgeable as he had claimed, and together they made plans for the future. They would need to buy more cattle before winter, repair the outbuildings, hire help for the spring roundup. It was daunting, but for the first time, Helena did not feel overwhelmed. She had a partner now, someone to share the burden and the rewards. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They rose before dawn and worked until sunset, pausing only for quick meals and the occasional moment of rest. But even the hard work felt different now. There was laughter mixed in with the labor, stolen kisses in the barn, quiet conversations as they rode out to check the herd. Austin's friends from the Triple Crown Ranch came to help with some of the bigger repairs, and Helena was touched by their easy acceptance of her. They treated her with respect, asking her opinion and following her instructions without question. She realized that they saw her as Austin did, as a capable rancher who knew her business. One evening about 3 weeks after the wedding, Helena and Austin sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Austin had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling content in a way she had never experienced before. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "About how much has changed," Helena said. "A month ago I was alone and desperate. Now I have you and the ranch is secure and I feel like I can breathe again." "I am the lucky one," Austin said. "I got a beautiful wife and a ranch to call my own. I got everything I ever wanted." Helena tilted her head back to look at him. "Did you really notice me before?" "Before that day with Edward, I did," Austin confirmed. "The first time I saw you was about a year ago. You were at the feed store, arguing with old man Tucker about the price of seed. You stood your ground, did not let him cheat you just because you were a woman. I remember thinking you were magnificent." "Why did you not say anything then?" Helena asked. Austin was quiet for a moment. "Fear, I suppose. I am just a cowboy, Helena. I did not think I was good enough for you. You are educated, you own land, you have roots in this community. I was a hired hand with nothing to my name but a horse and some saved wages." "You are not just anything," Helena said fiercely, turning to face him fully. "You are the best man I have ever known. You saved me, Austin, not just the ranch, but me. You made me believe I was worth something." "You were always worth something," Austin said, cupping her face in his hands. "I just helped you see it." They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and Helena felt her heart swell with an emotion that was becoming increasingly familiar. She was falling deeper in love with her husband every day, and from the way he looked at her, the way he touched her, she believed he felt the same. As summer faded into autumn, the ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. They bought 20 new head of cattle at a good price, and Austin's expertise helped them prepare for the coming winter. They worked on weatherproofing the barn, stocking up on feed, and making sure all the equipment was in good repair. Helena had never been happier. The fear and loneliness that had plagued her for so long had been replaced by joy and purpose. She loved working alongside Austin, loved the easy way they communicated, finishing each other's thoughts and anticipating each other's needs. She loved the nights they spent tangled together in their bed, learning each other's bodies and hearts. She loved the quiet mornings when they sat together over coffee, planning their day, and the evenings when they would read aloud to each other by lamplight. But it was not just the big moments that mattered. It was the small things, too. The way Austin always saved her the last piece of pie, the way he would brush the hair from her face when she was concentrating on something, the way he never failed to tell her she was beautiful, to touch her scar with tenderness, to make her feel cherished. One October morning, Helena woke feeling slightly ill. She had been tired lately, and her stomach had been unsettled for several days. At first, she dismissed it as the result of hard work and changing seasons. But as the symptoms persisted, a different possibility began to form in her mind. She said nothing to Austin, not wanting to raise hopes that might be unfounded, but when she missed her monthly cycle, she could no longer ignore the signs. She was pregnant. Helena sat in the kitchen, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to process this new reality. A baby. She and Austin were going to have a baby. Fear and excitement warred within her. She had never thought much about children, had never imagined herself as a mother. Now it was becoming a reality and she was terrified. "Helena." Austin's voice came from the doorway, concern evident in his tone. "Are you all right? You have been quiet all morning." She looked up at him, this man she had come to love so completely, and felt tears well in her eyes. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Austin froze, his eyes going wide. For a moment, he did not move, did not speak, and Helena felt panic begin to rise. What if he did not want children? What if this changed everything? Then Austin crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Helena asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy?" Austin pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes too. "Helena, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. This is everything, more than I ever dreamed of having." They held each other for a long time, laughing and crying, talking about the future and all the changes a baby would bring. Austin was gentle with her after that, insisting she not work too hard, worrying over every task she undertook. Helena found his concern both touching and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a feed sack. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can still work." "I know," Austin said, but his brow was furrowed with worry. "I just want to make sure you are safe, that you and the baby are healthy." Helena softened at the genuine fear in his voice. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We will be fine," she promised. "We are strong. And we have you watching over us." Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the mountains and turned the ranch into a frozen wonderland. Austin and Helena spent the long, cold evenings planning for the baby, turning the small spare room into a nursery. Austin built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood, and Helena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. As her pregnancy progressed, Helena's body changed in ways that sometimes made her self-conscious. But Austin never faltered in his affection and desire for her. He told her she was beautiful every day, and the way he looked at her made her believe it. He was attentive and caring, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of the day, holding her when her emotions overwhelmed her, reading to her and the baby every night before bed. "I love you," Helena told him one snowy evening as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his hand splayed protectively over her rounded stomach. Austin went very still. They had not said those words to each other yet, though Helena had felt them growing in her heart for months. "Say that again," he said quietly. "I love you, Austin Tate," Helena repeated, propping herself up to look at him. "I love you with everything I am. I know we started this marriage out of necessity, but somewhere along the way it became real for me. You became essential. I cannot imagine my life without you." Austin's eyes were bright with emotion as he pulled her down for a deep kiss. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "I have loved you since that first day on the street, maybe even before. You are my heart, Helena. You and this baby are my whole world." They made love slowly and carefully, mindful of her growing belly, and afterward Helena felt a completion she had never known. She was loved. She was cherished. She belonged. Spring came with a rush of new life. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers, and Helena's pregnancy reached its final weeks. She was huge and uncomfortable, waddling more than walking, but Austin never complained about the extra work he had to take on. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the spring roundup and the calving season, making sure Helena could rest as much as possible. On a warm May afternoon in 1883, Helena went into labor. Austin rode for the doctor in town while Mrs. Chen stayed with Helena, coaching her through the contractions and preparing everything they would need. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Austin was beside himself with joy when Dr. Stevens brought him in to meet his son. Helena was exhausted but radiant as she held the tiny bundle, marveling at his perfect little face, his shock of dark hair so like his father's. "What should we name him?" Austin asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving his son's face. "Samuel," Helena said. "After my father, Samuel James Tate." "Samuel," Austin repeated, reaching out to let his son's tiny hand wrap around his finger. "Welcome to the world, Samuel. Your mother and I have been waiting for you." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Austin with their son made Helena fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby without complaint. The ranch continued to prosper under their careful management. The cattle herd grew, they hired more help, and soon they were turning a profit that would have made Helena's father proud. People in town no longer looked at Helena with pity. Instead, they saw her as Mrs. Tate, respected rancher and mother, part of a strong partnership that was becoming the talk of Central City. One evening when Samuel was 6 months old, Helena and Austin sat on the porch watching their son play with a set of wooden blocks Austin had carved. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Helena felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "I was thinking," Austin said, breaking the comfortable silence, "we should expand the house, add on a few more rooms." "More rooms?" Helena looked at him questioningly. Austin grinned, that boyish smile she loved so much. "Well, Samuel is going to need brothers and sisters, is he not? And we will need somewhere to put them all." Helena laughed, the sound bright and free. "You want more children?" "As many as you are willing to give me," Austin said, pulling her close. "I want a house full of laughter and noise, children running everywhere, a legacy we can be proud of. What do you say?" Helena looked at her husband, at the life they had built together, at their son playing happily at their feet, and felt her heart overflow. "I say yes," she whispered, "to all of it. To more children, to expanding the house, to building this life together. To everything." Austin kissed her tenderly, and Samuel chose that moment to toddle over, demanding his parents' attention with a happy babble. They scooped him up together, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting over their son's head in perfect understanding. 2 years later, Helena gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Grace. The ranch had doubled in size by then, and they had built the additions to the house that Austin had wanted. The place was always full of noise and activity, just as Austin had envisioned. He proved to be a devoted father, patient with his daughter's endless questions and games, teaching his son to ride almost as soon as Samuel could walk. Helena watched her family grow with wonder and gratitude. The woman she had been that terrible day in August 1882, standing in the street while a stranger called her disgusting, felt like someone from another lifetime. That woman had been broken and alone, convinced of her own worthlessness. The woman she was now knew better. She knew she was beautiful because her husband told her so every day and proved it with his actions. She knew she was strong because she had built a life from the ashes of despair. She knew she was loved because she saw it reflected in her children's eyes and felt it in her husband's embrace. Sometimes, on quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Helena and Austin would sit on the porch as they had done so many times before, and she would think about fate and chance. If Edward had not been so cruel, if Austin had not intervened, would she have found this happiness? It seemed impossible that so much good could have come from such a painful moment. "What are you thinking about?" Austin would ask, and Helena would smile and shake her head. "Just counting my blessings," she would say, and it was true. Years passed, bringing both joy and challenges. Samuel grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. The twins were wild and fearless, riding horses before they could read, determined to prove they were as capable as any boy. When Helena was 32, she gave birth to their fourth child, another son they named Marcus. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Austin's skills as a cattleman combined with Helena's business acumen made them a formidable team. They were respected in the community, sought after for advice, admired for their partnership. But for Helena, the greatest success was not measured in cattle or land or money. It was measured in the love she shared with her husband, in the family they had created, in the life they had built from humble and painful beginnings. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Helena with a gift. It was a portrait of her, painted by an artist he had commissioned from Denver. In the painting, Helena sat in a chair with sunlight streaming through a window, illuminating her face. The artist had not shied away from her scar. Instead, he had painted it clearly, honestly, and somehow the way the light fell made it look almost beautiful, just one part of the complex woman she had become. "I wanted you to see yourself the way I see you," Austin said as Helena stared at the portrait, tears streaming down her face. "Every day for 20 years, I have looked at you and seen the most beautiful woman in the world. This is what I see, Helena. This is who you are." Helena turned from the portrait to her husband, this man who had changed her life with a few simple words spoken in defense of a stranger. He was older now, gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as he had been that first day. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I will love you longer than that," Austin replied, pulling her into his arms. "Forever, Helena, you and me forever." They stood in their home, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the love they had nurtured, and Helena knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The scar on her face no longer represented pain and rejection. Now, it was simply part of her story, part of the journey that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful life. Outside, the Colorado mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to a love story that had begun with cruelty and transformed into something rare and precious. Inside, Austin and Helena held each other close, two people who had found in each other not just a partner but a home. The ranch would continue on, passed down through generations, along with the story of how it was saved. People would talk about Helena Reeves, who became Helena Tate, about the mail-order groom who called her disgusting, and the cowboy who said she was beautiful. They would talk about the love that grew between two people who took a chance on each other, who built something lasting from the most unpromising beginning. But no story, no matter how well told, could truly capture the depth of what Helena and Austin shared. That was theirs alone, a private joy that sustained them through all the years of their marriage. They grew old together on the ranch, watching their children have children of their own, seeing the family tree branch and spread like the cottonwoods along the creek. When Helena was in her 70s, sitting on the same porch where she had spent so many evenings with Austin, surrounded by grandchildren clamoring for stories, she would sometimes think back to that terrible day when Edward Finch stepped off the stagecoach. She would remember the pain of his words, the shame that had threatened to drown her, and then she would remember Austin stepping forward, tall and strong and certain. "He is wrong," Austin had said. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." And he had spent the rest of his life proving it, in 1,000 big and small ways, until even Helena believed it herself. Until the scar was just a scar, and she was just a woman who was deeply, profoundly loved. That was the real story, Helena would think, watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed her transformation. Not the dramatic rescue or the quick marriage, but the slow building of trust and affection into something unshakable. The daily choice to honor and cherish each other, through good times and hard times, in sickness and health, exactly as they had promised in that small church so many years ago. Austin lived to be 78 years old, still working the ranch until his body finally gave out. He died peacefully in his sleep, with Helena beside him as she had been for 53 years of marriage. His last words to her were the same as his first declaration, spoken with the conviction of a man who had never once wavered in his belief. "You are beautiful, Helena. The most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Helena lived 3 more years after Austin's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and partnership that she and Austin had established. When she finally closed her eyes for the last time, she went with a smile on her face, ready to join her husband in whatever came next. The ranch stayed in the family, as Austin and Helena had always wanted. The house they had built and expanded over the years stood strong, filled with new generations who would make their own memories within its walls. And on the mantel, in a place of honor, sat the portrait Austin had commissioned, showing Helena as she truly was, beautiful in every way that mattered. The story of the mail-order groom who called her disgusting, and the cowboy who said she was beautiful became family legend, told and retold with each passing generation. It was a reminder that love could come from unexpected places, that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the greatest blessings, and that true beauty was always in the eye of the beholder. But more than that, it was a reminder of what could be built when two people committed to truly seeing each other, to honoring each other, to building a life based on respect and partnership and deep, abiding love. Helena and Austin's marriage had not been perfect. They had argued and struggled, faced hardships and made mistakes, but through it all they had chosen each other, again and again, day after day, year after year. That was the real magic, the true happy ending. Not the dramatic rescue or the fairy tale romance, but the steady, enduring love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The love that transformed a lonely, scarred woman into someone who knew her own worth. The love that made a simple cowboy into a husband and father who changed lives with his kindness. The love that built a legacy strong enough to last for generations. And so the story ended where it began, in Central City, Colorado, in the heart of the Wild West. But instead of heartbreak and rejection, there was only love, lasting and true, exactly as it was always meant to be.